Hey guys, welcome to The Back Road. It's Christine, and today I'm here to bring you not one, not two, not three or four or five, but 6 album reviews. These are 6 country albums that I have personally enjoyed over the past couple of months. Traditionally, I have really devoted a whole entire video to a single album and dove really deeply into each song and analyzed it like super deeply, but I ain't got time for that today, unfortunately. There's way too much music and not enough time, so instead I'm trying something different. I'm going to talk about all of these albums more on a holistic level and point out things that I liked and maybe didn't like. I hope that either you are being introduced to this music for the first time, and in that case I encourage you to go check it out, or you have already listened to these albums and we can have a dialogue and share and connect over our varied opinions. Let me know in the comments whether you agreed or disagreed, and I'm just like very open to conversation and discussion and hearing what other people think, and that's why I like watching these kinds of videos, and that's why I'm making them. I feel like there are only 2 types of albums that you can release during a pandemic. Either an album that addresses and speaks to the current times. So the albums that kind of fall into this category are Tyler Childers, maybe BRENT COBB, or you can make an album that offers an escape from the current times. I would say CHARLEY CROCKETT, COLTER WALL, Brothers Osborne fall into that category, and I think both are very important, and we need both of those as humans. We want to connect with the world, but we also want to find some sort of distraction maybe. Honestly, I feel like no matter what, any album released during this period of time is going to automatically fall into one of those categories. Maybe like if someone were to release an album that was like everything is perfect and wonderful in the world and nothing is wrong, then people would be like, that is false. But I don't think anyone is doing that right now. So yeah, let's dive into the songs. CHARLEY CROCKETT is an artist that I've only started listening to in 2020, but became very obsessed with. Maybe obsessed is a strong word, but I really enjoyed his music and his voice, and he has this very characteristic way of singing where his voice kind of like goes up at the end of a phrase. I wish I could demonstrate it, but okay, so a normal person would sing, "There's Gimbalin," and he would say, "There's Gimbalin." That's so bad. Okay, I think his backstory is really cool. Like, he was discovered while busking in the subways of New York City, and then he like went through open heart surgery, and he grew up in Texas but spent time in New Orleans. So he has all these different rich influences of like blues and like Cajun music. Is that a type of music? I don't know. I know it's a type of food. And like country, and bringing all of those influences together. So the title of this album, Welcome to Hard Times, seems very fitting and relevant to 2020, but I believe that's just a coincidence because he came up with that prior to any of the events that transpired in 2020. I would say this album is definitely more of an escape from the current times. It feels very like vintage and timeless. It paints these scenes of like a Western film and a life and a time that seems like these events that could have happened 50 years ago or like 100 years ago. I think it has a very dream-like quality, but also with this upbeat energy. There's a lot of images of like a man that's kind of on the run, that's restless, that's gambling, that's traveling to all these different places. With songs like Run Horse Run or Paint It Blue, you really get that like galloping energy.
Through the town of our field, oh, the stranger one finally hardly spoke, folks around him didn't have too much to say.
So now we have an album from our favorite deep-voiced Saskatchewan native 25-year-old Coulter Wall. How can you not love his voice? I think this album brings out what we love about Coulter Wall, which is his voice and the topics and themes that he sings about, but adds a little bit more energy with more percussion. There's lots of songs that kind of evoke the imagery you would expect from Coulter Wall, the cowboys and being out in the open plains. There's kind of all these different stories. There's a lot of different characters. Big Iron is a really cool song about like this guy who shows up in town and kills this outlaw that no one's been able to kill, and like the whole town is watching it. It's this like epic showdown. I really do like Talkin' Prairie Boy, which is more of like a spoken word type of song. It's really his like anthem about himself, like showing up in a big city, showing up in Nashville and feeling like, oh, I don't really belong. And this interaction with like a random guy who's like drinking an IPA, and just like the way he presents that is really like funny. Might already know, I am freaking obsessed with Tyler Childers. He is one of my favorite artists ever, and back in mid-September he released this surprise album. This album is really interesting because the appeal is not really the musical content as much as the concept and the message that he is trying to convey. It is an album that really speaks to the current times, and he is essentially using his platform to deliver a message to his audience. You can probably already guess from the title, it is about the Black Lives Matter movement, but kind of connecting that to something that his audience can relate to. This album itself is a series of old-time fiddle tunes that leads up to this final song, Long Violent History, that does have lyrics. And Tyler Childers also released a video message to accompany the album and explain his intentions. Tyler Childers is very aware and acknowledges that most of his audience is rural, white, working class individuals who are most likely conservative, most likely Trump supporters, most likely confused by and skeptical of the Black Lives Matter movement. And what Tyler Childers is essentially doing is asking them to just think about it and empathize and pose the question, like, what if that was you? Like, what if this was happening to your community? How would you feel about that? Now, what would you get if you heard my opinion conjecturing on matters that I never dreamed in all my born days as a white boy from Hickman, based on the way that the world's been to me? It's called me belligerent, it's took me for ignorant, but it ain't never once made me scared just to be. Could you imagine just constantly worrying, kicking, and fighting, begging to breathe? I think this is really awesome because sometimes what it takes to like get people to see the world in a new way, like having someone you look up to and admire, that person being Tyler Childers, being this voice.
If you ever grow up, one thing you'll find, most people that you meet.
So now we have an album by Brent Cobb. If you were wondering whether he is related to legendary producer Dave Cobb, well, the answer is yes, they are cousins. Dave Cobb produced his first album, I think, but not this one. This album to me feels like this gentle, relaxing, calm fishing trip. I would say overall the album feels very subdued and chill and introverted. It's not like in your face the way the next album I'm going to talk about is. Keep them on their toes is some good advice about just trusting yourself and not listening to other people and just surprising them. There's a lot of good advice in here, a lot of like social commentary, not quite about like politics or current events, but just about his view of the world, and like it's very humble and realistic, acknowledging that the world is shitty and there are people that suck, but you just gotta like do your best. album from the brothers Osborne, not to be confused with the Osborne brothers, a bluegrass duo from the 60s and 70s. I really don't think anyone is confused though, because they're like super different. Anyways, this album is probably their most rock album thus far. I find it very angry and masculine and energetic. I would say out of like all the albums I'm talking about today, this was my least favorite, and I also might say that this is my least favorite Brothers Osborne album. I really did like songs off of Port St. Joe and Pawn Shop. I really liked that like sensitive, emotional side, which kind of gets stripped out from this album. I think what it has going for it is that some of these songs are super catchy and super hooky and really fun, and they really energize you. Okay, my favorite song is Back on the Bottle. For some reason, that like mid-song tempo change just like really excites me. I don't know, maybe my brain is like, ooh, something different. I'm Not For Everyone. I really do like that song a lot. It reminds me a lot of Luke Combs and his message through his songs, that's kind of saying like, you know, I'm not perfect, but I'm trying my best. I would say like most of the content, like the songwriting, I'm not that crazy about. I think most of these songs are kind of just about like the vibe and the feeling and the party energy, more so than like a truly deep connection. I could see this being really fun like in a live concert setting when we have those again, but in the meantime, this album was like alright.
Well, that label man said, son, now can you sing?
Last but not least is the latest album from Sturgill Simpson. It is called Cuttin' Grass, which is a great pun if you ask me, and he's taken select songs from his previous albums and kind of reimagined them in a bluegrass version. He's brought together like the best bluegrass players in the world, and it includes the mandolin queen herself, Sierra Hull. Okay, I had a dream the other night where I was in my childhood bedroom and Sierra Hull and Coulter Wall were there with me, and I was like, come, sit down. And I was like trying to give her my mandolin to play, which I have right here. Weird dream. And then I woke up, so I didn't actually get to like jam with them, which is like quite disappointing to be honest. But maybe next time, maybe next dream. Speaking of dreams, what is really cool about Sturgill Simpson is with his past albums, with the sound and the lyrics, he really puts out this like dreamlike psychedelic quality. His lyrics are quite spiritual and abstract, and they really make you like think about the world, which I love, which is kind of a contrast to country music in the traditional sense. I usually imagine lyrics that are really concrete and tangible about everyday life. Oh, some background on Sturgill Simpson. I really imagine him as this kind of like rebellious outlaw outsider who's kind of doing his own thing, busking outside of the CMAs, not really caring what everyone else thinks, so like putting out a rock album and everyone's like, what? And then now he's pivoted and put out a bluegrass album and everyone's like, what? I freaking love this album. Like, it is so much fun. This album really fuses two disparate elements that I've loved separately, which is bluegrass instrumentation, along with Sturgill Simpson's voice and lyrics, combining them together to make something beautiful. I think it's really interesting to compare the bluegrass versions of these songs against the originals. So something that I noticed was when I was first listening to this album, I thought these songs sound so great in their bluegrass renditions. They sound like they were made for bluegrass. Like, it doesn't sound like this fake bluegrass adaptation, like trying to fit a originally not bluegrass song into this like bluegrass costume, and you're like, I can see through that. It doesn't feel like that at all. These songs feel authentically bluegrass. But then you listen to the original versions and you're like, wait, these sound good as their original version too, which was definitely not bluegrass. So basically for me, listening to this bluegrass album, I'm like, wow, these songs sound amazing. I love them as their bluegrass versions. I love them better than the original. And then I listened to the original versions and I was like, whoa, like these are even better than the bluegrass versions. And I think it's this like weird phenomenon where the more you listen to different versions of the same song, the more you end up liking that song and all the different versions of it. It's hard for me to say, like, do I like the bluegrass versions better? Do I like the original versions better? I think this album has really made me like all of it better. What I think is really interesting is that the bluegrass instrumentation really gives all of these songs a very joyful, lighthearted energy to them. It gives them a more consistent feel, which makes sense because it's the same set of instruments throughout. But at the same time, it kind of strips away some of the subtler emotions and intensity and darkness and color of the original versions. So you kind of have like pros and cons, and I think it depends on what mood you're in. If you want something really like upbeat and light and fun, then you would go for the bluegrass version. If you want something more dark and intense, maybe you'll go for the original version. I think what's also interesting is, as I've mentioned, Sturgill's lyrics tend to be rather spiritual and dreamy and psychedelic. Some examples are, God is inside you, all around you and up above, showing you the way. Okay, maybe that's not that weird. I woke up today and decided to kill my ego. Am I dreaming or am I dying? Oh, and my favorite one, reptile aliens made of light cut you open and pull out all your pain. Marijuana, LSD, psilocybin, and DMT, they all change the way I see, but love's the only thing that's ever saved my life. A lot of these lyrics are quite out there that you wouldn't typically see in like traditional bluegrass. Like it feels familiar yet like new and exciting at the same time. I would definitely say this is my favorite album out of the bunch that I talked about today. It's given me so much happiness and I'm like so grateful for it. I look forward to volume 2. That is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Thanks for being on this journey with me, and I will see you soon.